What if I told you that in Microsoft 365, all roads lead to Rome? Okay, maybe not all roads, but most roads. This one? This road certainly leads to Rome, but maybe not this one. The important thing is before you set out on your journey in Microsoft 365, you plan your route carefully so that you do end up in Rome. Quick introduction, my name is Matt and I run a company called Labyrinth Technology. We help empower businesses with their IT, Microsoft 365 and cybersecurity. You can find a link to my LinkedIn profile in the video description. Now, before we get stuck in with a hands-on demonstration, I just want to show you a couple of slides that I recently showed to one of my clients and they found it really useful. So at the start of the video, when I talked about most roads leading to Rome, I'm talking about where your data is actually stored in Microsoft 365 and the way that you integrate the apps that you use. So people often get quite confused about whether to use Teams or OneDrive or SharePoint. In actual fact, most of this data is actually all in the same place. It's just a different way of accessing it. So first up, data that you access via the Files tab in Microsoft Teams is actually stored in SharePoint. So every single Microsoft team that you use has its own SharePoint site. And a lot of people don't realize that. You might not actually be using that SharePoint site, but all of your data is on that site. And we'll come on to that in a minute. Microsoft OneDrive can be used to sync content from a SharePoint site to your computer. And that allows you to replicate a traditional file server experience, a really simple way of accessing your data. You've then got personal files that you keep in OneDrive that are not actually shared with anybody else. They're not stored in your company SharePoint or Microsoft Teams. So as we can see with this diagram here, Microsoft SharePoint is really the hub of information within Microsoft 365. So whether you're using the SharePoint web app or the SharePoint mobile app, or using Microsoft Teams to work with files, or integrating applications like Adobe, or using OneDrive for a two-way sync of that data is all in Microsoft SharePoint. Looking at this next slide, here we've got a Microsoft team with 4 different channels, and with the exact same name as that team, there's a SharePoint site in the background. This is created automatically, and in the documents folder on there, we've got 4 folders with the same names as those 4 channels there. Now, I really don't encourage people to create a Microsoft team channel for every single folder that they've got in their SharePoint site. I do see people try and do this a lot, and I understand what they're trying to do, but it just makes it confusing for people to use Microsoft Teams when you've got a really small team and you've got crazy numbers of channels within Microsoft Teams. So I don't encourage you doing that. If you want to be able to access your files through Microsoft Teams, there is another way of doing it without creating a channel for every single folder that you've got. So in terms of when to use each app, there really is no one-size-fits-all solution here. But generally, this kind of approach I find works best for most organizations. I do have another video that goes into this in more detail, but you've got a SharePoint Hub, which is a way of bringing together a whole load of different sites and creating a common navigation experience across multiple SharePoint sites. And I'll show you that in this video. You've then got Microsoft Teams, which is a way of teams to collaborate within Teams. Now, what you don't really want to do is, if you're predominantly using Microsoft Teams for sharing files, you don't want someone in the accounts team being added to the HR team just so they can access certain HR files, because that's going to give them access to the whole team, and that's going to start to limit the kind of conversations that HR can have within their Microsoft team. So the SharePoint Hub approach really is the way to go. It creates a website with a way of navigating all of the files that you have access to from one single pane of glass, without having to add everyone to every single Microsoft team that they need to access files from. And Microsoft OneDrive is an application you can use if you need to work with specialist files, such as AutoCAD files or other files that you need to edit that are not Microsoft Office documents, so image files, maybe PDF files, or Adobe Illustrator files. You need to use OneDrive to sync those to your computer. There are some other solutions you can explore, but OneDrive is one way of doing it. Alternatively, you can also use OneDrive to sync the folders that you commonly work on from SharePoint to your computer for those that prefer that traditional file sharing experience. but really you don't want to be syncing every single folder from SharePoint to your computer. Now, OneDrive can be set up so that it doesn't actually save all the files to your computer. They appear on your computer, but they don't actually download to your computer until you first access them. You've then got personal files. So these are files that you're never, ever going to need to share with anyone else, like maybe your pay slips that you could store in OneDrive and not keep in SharePoint. But you have to be really careful with the messaging on this, because what you don't want is people just saving company files in their OneDrive, not inside a SharePoint folder. And then if they're sick, they leave the company or whatever else, nobody else can get access to those files. So let's take a look at Microsoft Teams. In Microsoft Teams, I've got this IT services team, and we've got a files tab right here. I've just set this team up, so there's nothing in there at the moment. But let me create a folder. So I'm going to just call this folder 1. I'm going to create a Word document in here called my document. Now, if I go into posts and I just send a file in here, that is going to sit kind of loosely in this folder, inside this chat folder here, not in any particular structure. So it can easily get quite messy in Microsoft Teams. It's a lot better to save the file into the area that you need it to be, and then copy a link to that file and send the link in the chat. That way we're not duplicating information. We've got things filed where we want them to be. And I can just copy and paste that in here. So that link is not creating any new access. Anyone that didn't already have access is not going to see this file if it's not shared with them. But everyone in this team should have access unless we've changed the permissions. And here is my file. Okay, so when people click on that, it's just going to open the file from Microsoft Teams here. It's not duplicate. So if I go to make changes to that file, I don't need to resend the link, because when people open that file, they're going to see the latest version of it. So let's take a look now at Microsoft SharePoint, because there is a Microsoft SharePoint site for this team. So if I come into my SharePoint Admin Center, I'm going to go into Admin and go into the SharePoint Admin Center. And if I go to Active Sites here, I can see my IT Services SharePoint site. So if I click on that IT Services site and go into Documents, so this site is created. I've only just created this team inside Microsoft Teams just before we're filming this video, and this site has created automatically. So if I click on Documents here, I will see the folders that I've just created in Teams. So it's inside this chat folder. So chat is the name of the channel that we're using here. And if I click on that, we've got folder 1 and my document. Now you can set up SharePoint so that when you click on a file, it just opens in the desktop app by default. So rather than clicking on it and it opens in the web app, or having to click the 3 dots there and going open in app, you can set this up so that by default, the files will open in the desktop app. We click on the settings cog and click site information and click view all site settings. You then need to click on Site Collection Features. If you scroll down here, we've got Open Documents in the Client Applications by default. So if I now click on Activate and go back to my site, when I click on this file, it's going to open in the desktop version of Microsoft Office. Okay, so this is my file. So I'm just going to stick a heading on it. You'll notice at the top here, autosave is turned on and it's already saving my changes to SharePoint. So what I haven't done here is downloaded the file, I'm just streaming the file. We're not ending up with multiple copies of that file all over the place. So if we go back to Microsoft Teams and click on the Files tab here, I can click on that document. I can see it was open a few seconds ago. I'm going to open it in App here. I can also edit it in Teams. And here is the file that I have just edited. Going back to the SharePoint site, on that SharePoint site, I can see we have got this sync button. So this sync button will allow me to sync the content with OneDrive. So let's click on sync. Okay, so that is now syncing this IT services chat folder to my computer. We can see here we've got this little cloud icon, which means the data is not actually saved to my device, But if I browse through here, it appears as if the files are on here, but it's not actually taking up any space. So I can open this file. The first time I open it, it's going to download a copy to my device, and it's going to stay on my device. So again, we're opening the same file here. No matter what way we come in, whether it's via Microsoft Teams, via SharePoint, or via OneDrive, we're looking at the same data, and that data is in Microsoft SharePoint. So this has now got a little green tick next to it, so it means it's now taking up space on my computer. Now, if I don't want it to take up space anymore, I can right-click it and click Free Up Space, and that's now going to remove it from my device, so it's no longer saved there, but I can double-click on it at any time, again, to access it. So we've got the blue cloud icon back there. So what about a kind of centralized experience for accessing files across multiple departments? Because what you don't want is this kind of siloed working experience where each department is only working out of their own Microsoft team or their own SharePoint site. Well, that's where a SharePoint Hub comes in. So let's take a look at that. And this video isn't all about Microsoft SharePoint. We're going to talk about some of the other integrations with Microsoft 365 later in this video, such as task management with Microsoft Planner. You can see earlier on, I have created this SharePoint Hub site. This is blank at the moment. It's not really doing anything, but you can use this as a kind of intranet, or you can scrap all of this and just have a few links to your different SharePoint sites. Really depends what works best for you. I'll do a video on how to set up SharePoint sites at some point, so make sure you subscribe if you haven't already. Going back here, now that I've created this site, so you just come in here to create a site, I can register this as a hub site by clicking register as a hub site. And that hub site will effectively be used to link together a series of other sites with a common theme and a common navigation structure. So let's click save. There we go. And now that I've done that, I can join my IT services site to that hub. So I just click on hub, associate with a hub, and let's join it to that hub. So if you're already using Microsoft Teams for your files and you want to bring everything together, you don't actually have to start again. You can just link all of those existing SharePoint sites that are already going to be there in the background, whether you're using them or not, to a newly created hub with just a few clicks. It's really easy, although it is important if you do that you really look at the permissions on all of those sites and teams to make sure that people don't have access to things that they shouldn't have access to. So if I now open my IT services site, I can see at the top here, I've now got a link to the hub. And back on the hub, there we go, I can add a link at the top there to the IT services site. So let's say we have got our HR department, our sales team, our marketing team, whatever else, our executive team. I can create a bunch of other teams or SharePoint sites for those and add them all to this hub. People will see from this single pane of glass all of the different sites. They're only going to have access to the things they have access to, but it allows them to navigate and browse between those sites without having to remember all the different links and going through this kind of siloed working experience. So I'm going to show you a finished product. So here's another SharePoint site that we've already created. And we can see along the top here, we've got a link into these different departments. If I click on that hub, on the home page, you can see that we've got these images for a more visual way of browsing those sites. So what we do a lot of the time is on the home page, create images for the different SharePoint sites, the different departments with a link, and people can either use that or they can use the menu along the top. But a lot of people like the kind of more visual navigation experience. And we've done that here on our service delivery SharePoint site. On the left-hand side, we've got the navigation menu, but we've also got these images here to give people that prefer that more visual navigation experience exactly that. Also on the right-hand side here, we've set up on our homepage for this team a whole load of useful links into other SharePoint content or other third-party websites. So we're using it as an intranet, but we're also using it to browse our files. So let's just click into Demo Library again here. And I can see all of the files and folders there. If I was in the service delivery team, I'd be able to access these files if we'd mapped this folder to Microsoft Teams. So a quick recap on that before we move on to the next point, which is managing your tasks in Microsoft 365. So back onto this slide, just to recap, We've got Microsoft Teams, which can access data from SharePoint, and every Microsoft team has its own SharePoint site. Whether you know about it or not, they're created by default. You can use a SharePoint hub to bring together those sites for that centralized management and navigation experience. You can use OneDrive to sync data from SharePoint if you find that easier. But ultimately, however you go in, SharePoint Web App, Microsoft Teams, Microsoft OneDrive, you're accessing the same data. Microsoft Teams, the idea is that you use it for team collaboration. You can then integrate third-party apps like Adobe directly with SharePoint so that you don't have to go through OneDrive to edit those specialist files. Let's talk about task management in Microsoft 365. I hear a lot of people ask, should I use Microsoft To Do? Should I use Microsoft Loop? Should I use Microsoft Planner? What is the best way to manage my tasks in Microsoft 365? Well, you can actually set all of these things up to integrate with Microsoft Planner so that Microsoft Planner is your central hub of tasks. And I like to use Microsoft Planner for this. One, because it integrates with these different apps, but two, because in Microsoft Teams, you can actually see your tasks across all different locations in one place. And I'm going to show you that right now. So just to explain this diagram in a bit more detail, you can add a Microsoft Planner board to a Teams channel. You can access the Planner board via the Planner web app. You can access Planner via Microsoft Loop. So you can add a Planner board to Microsoft Loop, and you can integrate Microsoft To Do with Planner. But what is a Microsoft Planner board? Microsoft Planner is a simple way of managing tasks or projects. So you can create a planner board like this. So if you've ever used Trello, it's pretty similar. You can create these different buckets and you can design them based on your needs, based on your project, or based on the purpose of that board. You might just have a team planner board that's always on the go to manage tasks for your team. So you can create these different buckets to organize those tasks. And then you can click and create these different cards, drag and drop them between the buckets. Really easy to use. I'll show you that very shortly. So Microsoft Planner is actually included in the vast majority of Microsoft 365 subscriptions. So usually you're not going to need an extra license. If you go into Microsoft365.com, click on the three dots in the top left, and if you don't see Planner there, you can just type Planner. There we go. And we are in. So I could come in here to create a new planner board and go into My Plans and click Create New Plan. But actually, because this plan that I'm going to set up is for my Microsoft team, it's actually better to just do it in Microsoft Teams, and that way you know the access is going to be set up properly. But I could create it in Microsoft Planner and just add the IT services team to that board. But I'm going to show you how to do that in here. First thing I'm going to do is just make sure I've got the Planner app added in Microsoft Teams. So I'm going to click on the apps there and I'm going to type Planner. There we go. And I'm going to hit open and I can add it to that team there. But for now, I'm just going to click on open. And now I've got Planner on the left-hand side here. So I'll show you this later, but however many different planner boards that you're assigned to across different teams, all of the tasks that are assigned to you, you can now access via this planner button within Microsoft Teams. So you can see them in one centralized location. So let's go back to my IT services team. And at the top here, I'm going to click on plus and search for Planner. Here it is. And we're going to leave that tick to post to the team about my new Microsoft Planner tab. We can add an existing plan. So if I had created one via the Planner web app, we could have added it. But I'm just going to click Create a New Plan. We can use templates, so project management, software development, simple plan, or just a basic blank planner board that I can do to fit my needs. So let's click on basic. And I'm going to call this IT Services Planner. There we go. And it's created these different buckets. So I can call this in progress. You can call it whatever you want. It really depends on how you want to work here. And completed. And you can I can create a task just by clicking on one of these. So let's call this clean the server room. Who's cleaned their server room recently? I bet a lot of you haven't. So I can now click on that. I can assign it to someone. So I'm going to assign that to myself. I can add a label to it, so you can customize these, give it a priority, set it to in progress, set dates or deadlines. So if you're the team manager, or project manager, or you just know that there's a deadline there, you can do that. And you can set the task to repeat. So if it's a weekly team meeting, you could set that as to repeat every week. Put a description in here. Server room is a mess, guys. Someone needs to clean it ASAP. And then I can create a checklist if I want to. I can attach files. So clean the server room, dust the server room, take out the old boxes of cables that we are hoarding. Okay. And there we go. All of this stuff is now displaying on the actual planner card there. And I can drag and drop these between boards pretty easily like that. So if I now go back into Microsoft Planner, because I've assigned that task to me, I can see it in here. So if I add a whole load of other tasks across a bunch of other teams that I'm a part of, I can still come into here and update that task. Or I can mark it as complete if it's done. So if that's now done, I can just tick it off and we'll go back onto the planner board for my team, IT services planner, and that is now checked off. So let's look at how you add a planner board to Microsoft Loop. So Microsoft Loop is a great way of collaborating and co-creating as a team. If you go back into Microsoft365.com, I have just done a video on Microsoft Loop recently. You can click on the grid of 9 dots there. I can see Loop there, but if you don't, just search for it or click on more apps and you'll see all of the apps you've got access to there. So I'm going to create a new workspace and we're going to call this the IT services team. I can add people here if I want to, but we will leave that for now. Let's click create. Let's give this a name. So IT services team. And if I click plus there, I can now search for the planner item, and then I can click on the IT services planner that I have just created and click insert. Okay, so now that team IT services planner board that I've just created is in here, and I can see that task that I completed earlier. I can mark that as not completed. I can tick off some of these. If I go back into Microsoft Teams, those changes will have synced through there. And the same if I go into Microsoft Planner here and in the web app and open the planner, looking at the exact same tasks. So you're not duplicating information. It's just a different way of accessing your tasks. Now, if you're using Microsoft To Do, you can also view those tasks assigned to you within Microsoft To Do. So if we go back to Microsoft365.com, click on the 9 dots there and click on To Do. Some people like using this to manage their own individual tasks, but if you click on Assign to Me on the left-hand side there, any tasks that are assigned to you within Microsoft Planner will show in here. So there's a lot of different ways to do things in Microsoft 365. It can be confusing, and it's really down to you as an organization to agree how you're going to utilize these apps and make sure you communicate that to your end users through the training that you provide. Don't just train them and give them a whole load of options. You need to help them understand how the organization has decided these apps will be utilized. But importantly, if you set this stuff up properly, if you use it right, most roads lead to Rome. Microsoft 365 is designed to be an integrated and collaborative experience. If you'd like to discuss your Microsoft 365 journey in more detail, please don't hesitate to get in touch with me on LinkedIn. I hope you found this video useful. If you did, make sure you subscribe for more content like this. Drop us a comment with your feedback or questions and give the video a thumbs up. See you next time.